The Nashville Predators are in the fight for a playoff spot. What will they do with at the trade deadline? And how does the recent injury to Filip Forsberg affect all that? And Kimmel of Locked On Predators is here to talk about that and more coming up next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Predators, Ann Kimmel. And teams at the crossroads right now. The Nashville Predators, they've been winning lately, but up and down all season, and now the Filip Forsberg injury. What is the latest? What do you know? And how does this affect the team short term and maybe a little bit further down the line?
Filip Forsberg left the game Saturday against the Philadelphia Flyers at the end of the first period, and the Predators today announced that he is listed as day-to-day with upper body injury. Day-to-day feels a little bit optimistic just from watching the injury happen, but that's how they're listing him. The Predators take on Arizona on Monday, so I think that feels like a little bit of extra breathing room with Forsberg out due to injury. But later on this week, we're looking at the Boston Bruins and the Florida Panthers. So the Predators, if he is not back in the next couple of days, are going to have to make some decisions about what they do with him out of the lineup.
Yeah, going to be a tough one. He has 19 goals to lead the team, second on the team with 42 points. Who do you think the team will look to step up if he misses a couple of games here or there?
Well, right now they have enough forwards. Tommy Novak was a healthy scratch in the game on Saturday. Mark Jankowski slotted into the lineup. So it may be that on the game against Arizona, they just bring in Novak and Jankowski. Of course, everybody in Nashville feels like this may be the opportunity to bring up young Phil Tomasino, who played last year for the Nashville Predators and has spent all season so far in Milwaukee. So if Filip Forsberg's injury is going to be a little bit longer term day-to-day injury, there is potential for this to be an open door for Philip Tomasino, who again, performed pretty well in his first NHL season for the Predators, but did not make the team out of camp. He is not leading in Milwaukee as far as goals or points, but he's had a little bit of an injury issue. He's back on the ice. So this may be an open door for us to see Phil Tomasino back on the ice in Nashville.
Will be interesting to see how the team plays that out. Right now, the Predators are in fifth place in the Central Division, but just 4 points out of third place, and they have 1 or 2 games in hand on the two teams in front of them. What do you foresee this team doing at the trade deadline, which is now about 3 weeks away?
This is a great question, and it's one that actually I'm not going to be able to answer real well for you until the Predators get maybe another 3 or 4 games under their belt, because the Predators are definitely at a crossroad. If this team kind of can't get it together, if this team looks like they're just kind of fall apart after the All-Star break, if they're not gaining momentum, gaining points, moving up in the Central Division, there is a chance that David Poile could decide to sell some pieces at the trade deadline. Now, I don't think you're going to see some huge moves, but one of the names that's been tossed around kind of consistently when it comes to trade pieces is defenseman Dante Fabro. So that's a name to kind of keep an eye on. Now, if the Predators turn this around and if they start gaining points moving up in the next 4 or 5 games, 6 games in February, David Poile could make a very different decision at the trade deadline. He may decide to bring in a piece or two. He's not one for doing a big, huge move at the trade deadline. But if he feels like the Predators are trending in the right direction, if he feels like this is a team that could make a playoff run, hopefully get into that second round of the playoffs, he may go out and try to pick up a piece or two, a depth piece for the Predators. But what's interesting is I don't think anybody, including David Poile, can tell you at this very point what the trade deadline is going to look like for the Predators.
If Poile decides to add a piece, what position, what kind of player do you think he'd look to bring in?
If he loses Dante Fabro, I would look for like a depth defenseman. They have some good depth defensemen in Milwaukee, but I'm not sure they have anybody that they feel is really ready to jump in full time. Also, kind of keep an eye on some secondary scoring pieces, something in a bottom six role. The Predators have not had a lot of support when it comes to depth scoring this season. They've brought in some different players from Milwaukee. We talked about Tommy Novak, Mark Jankowski, but players like Tanner Jeannot and Yakov Trenin, who combined for over 40 goals last season, both of those players have struggled. So David Poile may look for a piece to kind of shore up some bottom six scoring for the Predators, or he may decide to just, like we say, go with the girl he brought to the dance, and he may just take this team and see what they can do closer to playoff time.
Here we are, 50 games into the season, give or take. Why the inconsistency in Nashville? What has this team been lacking that they've sort of been disappointing in certain respects?
The most consistent thing about the Predators this season has been inconsistency, and it's been really frustrating. There are definitely some different ideas in the fan base as to what causes this. There are some people that feel like this is a coaching issue, that somehow John Hines has not been able to get all of these players on board. A lot of people say that there is maybe an issue with the core. Several weeks ago, the players and coaches had kind of a closed door meeting after a disastrous loss to the St. Louis Blues. And they had kind of a hockey come to Jesus, where some of the leaders of the team, Ryan Johansson is a name that was mentioned specifically by teammates, who really spoke from the heart, had very frank, very honest, and it was also described as uncomfortable conversations about personal performances and the play of the team. The response from the Predators were 3 great wins in a row before the All-Star break. So I think that there's an element that is just how much does this core believe and how committed are they to making a deep playoff run? If the Predators can keep momentum, if these core players can really perform as well as we know they have the ability to, it's a talented roster on paper. That hasn't translated this season, but I do think if the players can really commit from here on out, this could be a playoff team.
It's going to be an interesting ride the rest of the way. And why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find Locked On Predators anywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Predators. And you can follow me on Twitter at ANK_Mama on Ice.
All right. And always a pleasure. Thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn, one word, to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.